Welcome to Recruitment Reimagined, the executive podcast where we unpack the future of the recruitment industry, powered by AI and led by people. I'm Knowlson, and today I've got as a guest James Crawford. James has been a project lead working with, and you have to look at my notes here, transforming business as a leader for over 30 years. You've been focused on AI more recently. I think you just said to me last week you were the keynote speaker at the Federation of British of Small Businesses in their conference, which is quite significant. You're working on 4 or 5 projects with organisations in local government, charities, small businesses, and also in the facilities management. And we invited James today to talk to us about the actual process you go through when you are leading an AI project and to get some of the knowledge of his expertise of what he's actually doing right now. So welcome, James.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Good. My first question really relates to the projects that you've been working on. And you mentioned in our warm-up today, or in our pre-chat, that you've been working on a few projects, and the first ones of which were very much in back office, and that's where you're. So please tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Well, I think an AI journey, I'd describe it as a marathon rather than a sprint. So it's a matter of making sure that you've got a long-term perspective. So I often advise customers not to rush into projects with something which is too complex, because a lot of this is about people change. It's about completely rethinking the way that we each individually come to work, how we collaborate with our colleagues and our customers, and how we incorporate AI in all its different forms over time. So the key thing for me is to build confidence. So when we start off with an organization, often people come to the table with their hopes, their fears, their expectations. So a lot of the questions that come through are not about the technology or how to use it. They're about, will it take my job? What does it mean for my customers? Surely it hallucinates all the time. Can we rely on it? So people have picked up all sorts of different cues and issues as they've gone along, as well as a lot of curiosity and some enthusiasm. And there's a whole jumble of emotions there, as well as some practical steps that we need to go through.
That's interesting. That's classic change management, isn't it? That's classic Kubler-Ross change curve, which for anyone who's not familiar with, just drop James or I a note. We'll tell you where you can find details on the Kubler-Ross curve. But that's the process or the sequence of emotional steps that people go through when change occurs, isn't it? And that's what you're describing here, which is that traditional. And that must be something you've done for 30 years, as you've said. So
yes, that's right. I mean, that's the thing that interests me about AI, that it's a completely new technology, certainly in terms of generative AI, in terms of what it can do, built on many, many years of AI research and different types of systems. But then that comes together with the kind of classic psychology, change management, the whole cycle of adopting, thinking, and embracing change, and then making the most of it. So one of the key things to do is not just build confidence in your team, but also to reduce the risk of things going wrong. So as you're starting to explore tools like ChatGPT, which is often where I start because everyone's heard of it, a lot of people have tried it, and it's just a good place to start to build on. But when you do that with people's work, where they're doing research into candidates, when they're looking at generating business plans, understanding the financial reports or whatever it might be, that's a low risk way of starting. They can do that in their own time. They can incorporate it into their own daily work, but it doesn't actually then suddenly expose the results of that to their senior management or to their customers or whoever it might be. So back office, I always think, is a good place to start for many organizations as they're starting to generate that capability and starting to get a bit of a vision as to how this is going to change what they do. I'm working with
What sort of back office processes are you automating? Give people an idea of the sorts of things that they could do, use AI for themselves?
Yeah, well, I've been working with a charity, victim support charity, over the last few months. And I was speaking to the director there last week. We're doing a bit of a stock take of the work that we've been doing. So in terms of seeking funding opportunities, that's one of the things she works with. So doing a lot of research using tools like Perplexity.ai or the deep research from ChatGPT, using it to reach out to the internet to say what's out there in terms of funding calls, which type of organizations are interested in funding my type of project, my type of business. How can we understand what the target dates are, bringing together all of the information that we've provided previously to other applications, putting that into the application form together with our specific ideas about this one in terms of the unique elements that we bring, the kind of ideas we'd put forward in terms of response to the questions, doing as much preparation as possible, but then using the large language model to do the heavy lifting. So that's one of them.
That's the deep research on ChatGPT, which I think they've been putting out in the papers recently and on the press.
Yes.
Social. And the other tool you mentioned was what? Sorry.
So Perplexity.ai. So that's one which is particularly good for research. It's fine-tuned to not only draw on the body of knowledge from the internet that it's ingested during its training process, but also reach out to live websites as well. And it comes up with good, well-considered information, well curated, together with the citations and links.
So I have a question. I can almost hear the audience behind me going, so could we use that as a business development tool, as a way to do market research around the opportunities in a market?
Yeah. I think that's another good use for it. So what it can do is, with the right kind of guidance from you in terms of the target sectors you're after, you can tell it pages of information if you wish. You don't just have to put a few sentences into your prompt. The more you give it in terms of how you're set up, the kind of customers that really value your service, the expertise that you've got, the knowledge of your consultants, the target markets that you want to move into, it can then reach out in several stages. And this is a great kind of back office example. So it's a difference between fast AI and slow AI, as I call it. If you use kind of traditional GPT, you ask it a question, you give it a challenge, and up it comes. It gives you, paragraphs or pages of information depending on what you want. The deep research tools are what I call slow AI. So you give it the same information, you set it a challenge, but it'll typically be more complex. So in that exact example, this is our organization. We need more customers in these particular sectors that have these particular kind of attributes. Please go away and find them. And the slow AI kind of sits back, strokes its chin, and think, right, how will I go about this? And it'll divide its own task into several stages. So first of all, it will think, okay, let me understand who you are and therefore the kind of businesses that you'll be looking for. Then let me think through, how do I characterize these businesses and build a search profile for them? Then it'll go out to the internet and start to look for organizations which fit that kind of profile, and it will draw on their websites, ports, press releases, social media, whatever it might be. Then it'll think, okay, how do I process this and start to rank them in terms of what's going to be the most effective target for me to go on to? And then it'll say, right, and how am I going to present this information? And it'll define a report. And then ultimately, after about 5 or 10 minutes, it'll give you this well-considered report that could have taken you, half a day to produce over a period of 2 weeks in line with your other work. But suddenly you've got it within 10 minutes. And you can say, right, okay, that's a great start. I can now fine tune it. I can ask it further questions. And then I can pass it on for someone to actually start to action.
I'm going to have a play with this, because this sounds amazing. I mean, I've heard about the deep research of ChatGPT, and I've actually had a play with it myself, and it was all right. It's okay. Didn't see it as being earth-shattering, but this sounds, Perplexity AI sounds, well, it sounds like it's a different level, and I think that was what I felt about the first report I got back. It wasn't at the right level. It was like, I probably knew most of it anyway. So yeah, interesting, fascinating.
So deep research is something which a number of organizations are now coming forward with. ChatGPT's got its own alongside its web search and its normal chatbot. And they are getting better over time. But I think more importantly, we're getting better over time. We're learning how to use them. We're increasing our own capability in terms of collaborating with these chatbots and getting the most out of them. So that's really why it's important to start early. Bring your people with you, build up that capability of using these tools. And so that as you progress your AI journey and you start to redesign your services, your people are ready for it. And they've got the confidence and the skills to do it.
I'm interested because my experience, and we talked about this offline a little bit, my experience of ChatGPT is it doesn't make an amateur an expert, in my experience. What it does, it lets an amateur produce a pretty average, bland answer. But what it does do is it makes an expert really, really good, and it can also be a critical friend of an expert. It can challenge you. And actually, it can make an expert even more expert. And I think, reading between the lines, that's kind of what you've just said. But I'm interested, is that your experience, James? Or do you think everyone needs to be afraid of, all these experts need to be afraid of their jobs because AI is going to take over?
I think takeover. I'm not one of the takeover people. I
Okay.
think it's going to change what we do and it's going to disrupt what we do. But
Okay,
I would
good.
also say that for amateurs as well, if they're using it with the right kind of soft skills, it maybe not won't make them a full expert, but it will make them very proficient in many areas that they hadn't got the ground in. So if you've got the right way of creating a prompt, if you've got the right business analysis skills to think back and think, what do I need? How am I going to articulate that? How am I going to write, if you like, a task description for ChatGPT or Google Gemini? Or how am I going to define a role description in terms of how I want it to work with me? And then if you've got the critical thinking to say, I'm going to follow it up with questions to really test and probe the information it's got. And I'm going to sit back myself and think, is this good information? Is it going to be really helpful? How can I make it better? If you approach it in that particular way, then an amateur can come up with some very, very good output because they've properly considered it. And it's a bit like having the amateur sat next
Oh,
to an expert. So really, ChatGPT can be the expert if you ask them the right questions. So,
yeah.
for instance, if you're, director of a small recruitment agency, and you're trying to say, okay, I need to triple my business in the next 3 years, and you get a business growth specialist sat next to you, you can say, okay, how can I triple my business in the next 3 years? And they'll say, oh, well, you've got to reach out and do more marketing. You've got to therefore be more clear in terms of your targeting, which means you've got to have a defined strategy. And they'll give you very generic, bland answers, which is fine as a starting point. But you then get right into the conversation and you say, right, well, actually, what I'm thinking of is this, or I tried that and it didn't work. And I've just recruited someone who's got some expertise in a sector which is not quite what we do at the moment. And then the business growth specialist will suddenly say, right, okay, I've got something to latch onto now. This is what we can shape together. And within an hour or two, you've got a lot of rich insight, which is very, very specific to you. And that's very much the approach you need to take with these AI tools. Have that kind of interaction with it. The more you feed it, the more you ask questions, the more you think back, how can I take this conversation into a better space? Or ask the chatbot, where can we go with this conversation now? It's that relationship, as it were, that makes the difference. And moving from something which is quite a vanilla flavored response to something which is very, very impactful and powerful just for you.
Wow, that's interesting. And we talked very briefly offline again before we came on, and you mentioned to me that AI is being used in the back office. That's kind of like everyone's doing that. You're now saying it's moving into the front office, and that you find that quite exciting and interesting. So, in what do you find so exciting about it, James?
Right. Well, there's a few examples which have been out in the press recently. You've probably heard of some organisations which are starting to do the pre-screening interviews using an avatar.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that candidates have got mixed feedback on that. Some
Yeah.
people think, well, I can schedule it as I want. I'm out all day. I've got some time at 10 p.m. That just suits me because the family's gone to bed. I'll do my pre-screening at 10 p.m. when it's convenient. And it really doesn't matter because the AI is just, as soon as you click, it's available. Other people think, well, it's a bit of an insult, really, to be interviewed by a computer. But we're seeing more and more of that at the moment. And potentially it's a good solution for recruiters because they can actually have a much richer sense of a person. They can actually then maybe watch the recording or even have an AI analyze the recording to say, how does that person respond? Have they got the kind of insights and expertise that I'm looking for? And it jumps out much more than just a plain CV. So potentially a good tool for recruiters, in some cases good for candidates, in some cases not. But of course, we're then starting to hear about candidates who send their own avatars to the interviews. And then we've got AI interviewing AI. So you can have two points of view on that. You can either say, what a complete waste of time. Or if the recruiter's AI avatar has been set up in a really thoughtful way to ask some probing questions about the role, the nature of the organization, how that links to the experience of the candidate, what they bring to it. And if the candidate's AI has got a really good sense of them as a person, not just their CV, but having read their emails, looked at how they work, picked up over a number of months their kind of nuances, their expertise, the kind of breadth of knowledge that they've got, or the real focus that they've got. If you've got these two avatars talking to each other within a few minutes, if it's a genuine, transparent, thoughtful conversation, as it were, suddenly you've actually got someone who's really on the shortlist or someone who's really not. So it's
It's
something which could work really well or really badly.
it's an interesting concept. When I was public sector director of Hayes, certainly Hayes IT for a while, I had a team of people working for me on some fairly important strategic projects for the government. One was for DWP, one was the NHS Connecting for Health. And in order to perform the interviews in the right way, we use structured interview techniques. So, if I was looking to recruit a program director, they would be structured interviews around the projects they'd run, techniques they'd use when the project got behind, size of project. So those are fairly standard structured questions. And I could see how an avatar might ask those questions, but they're quite predictable. B, there's no reason why, if it's a structured interview and you're asking candidate A, candidate B, and candidate C are going to be asked the same question. So if candidate A goes in, gets the interview questions, and then gives them to C and B and C. I can see how it has a value. I can see how it works. I can see how people can cheat it. But at the end of the day, I actually stepped back from that process because what I discovered is this has been around for years, James. Recruitment organizations use what are called killer questions. So they know there are 5 questions. If every candidate answers, I can trim my long list down from 1,000 to 50 people that I can then home in on. But the trouble is, the candidates that are most likely to make the 50 are probably highly sought after, and they quite often won't engage in the killer question process. So what ultimately happens is you actually never get your shortlist, and you never get enough on the shortlist to interview and fill the positions. So you then have to throw the net out even further to do some even bigger trawling to get the numbers to fill. Because the good quality candidates don't need to go through that process. And that's the challenge that we have, is that if we create too many hurdles, people will drop out. So it has to be engaging. And my gut feel at the moment, where we have large numbers, very large numbers of skill shortages across industry, and I'm not just talking about tech, I'm talking about engineering, healthcare, education, construction, you name it. Those people will just disengage. The better ones don't need to do that. So, yeah, if you're looking to fill a call center over Christmas, or people to work in a warehouse picking and packing for one of the big haulage companies or Amazon or whatever, then yeah, you could probably do that. But I just got a feeling if you're looking for a credit controller with 10 years experience, with good solid experience, or you're looking for a .NET developer, you're not going to get them using that kind of thing. That's my experience. But the proof
As always, you can
in the eating. Sorry, James, go on.
Yeah, you can divide people into quarters, can't you? So you've got the people that are really kind of fascinated by this whole process and will really engage and just be keen. They're either desperate for a job, or they're just really kind of on top of the process, or they've got too much time on their hands. You've got another set of people that are really not interested, and you've really got to coax them into applying for jobs or going through the process, even if they're great candidates, because they've got so many other interesting things that they're involved in. And then you've got some other people in the middle that are either more or less likely to do it. So I think there's definitely a section of the candidate population that would really engage with this. I think coupled with some of the research techniques. So a researcher can spend many hours researching various people for a particular role, but where you've got an AI that can bring in a lot of that information from different platforms, whether it's from LinkedIn, whether it's from social media, the kind of posts that they've put forwards, the press releases they may have put out as part of their previous company website, or whatever it might be, suddenly you can massively increase the amount of reach you've got into bringing that data in, and also processing that data to find out what's relevant. You could find that a particular candidate's been in an adjacent sector, for instance, but recently they've been blog posting on something which you're particularly interested in terms of the sector of your client, and they've got some really interesting insights. So as a productivity tool for the researchers, you can bring that in. Now, once that's in and the AI has collected that data and it's analyzed it and it's given the nuggets through to the researcher, you can then set up a conversation on the back of that which can be very, very specific and interesting for that particular candidate. So suddenly you're not just asking the same 6 questions you asked everybody else, but you're actually able to, if you want to, dive into some of the detail. Tell me more about that point that you put forward. We've got this particular challenge that we're recruiting for. How would you go about it? But you can do that either by prompting the consultant to have a conversation, or you can do it through the AI. But you've got that choice, and you've got the insights which are much more available, much more easily to your team.
I definitely agree with you. I think as an augmentation tool, I can see it works very, very well with an experienced recruiter. So if I've got a tool that in the background is analysing the answers that the candidate is giving me and giving me some suggested lines of inquiry, that to me, I could find helpful, definitely. But as a replacement for a interviewee, I think, I'm not sure I can see it has its uses. I can see in lower skilled roles where you're putting an advert out and you're getting 2,000 applicants respond. I can see it as a value. But, where we've got critical data shortages and skill sets like, data analysts, cybersecurity people, I mean, even recruiters who aren't qualified and unskilled enough are struggling to find those candidates. So there's no way in a million years at the moment, I think, that we would get to that solution. But I would also say never, because technology is advancing. You and I talked offline about new things around neural networks and how the AI is going to learn, and I made a statement to you, which is there's things about human behavior and emotional intelligence that AI can't do yet. And you said, yeah, agreed. Yeah, Ian. But I said 5 to 10 years, you think it'll be a lot quicker, sooner. So it's interesting. I mean, again, share with the listeners, why you think these things are coming up, because, you might be right and I might be wrong. It'll be fascinating.
It is hard to predict the future. But going back to the charity I mentioned earlier, the director I was speaking to estimated that around about a third of the time that she spends per week in terms of these big tasks when it comes to producing the impact statement, liaising with funders, generating stakeholder plans, etc., around about a third of the time she saves by using these tools. Now that, of course, is what I call back office, because it's very much her preparation in the office. Yes, it's used to speak to people and send information out and collaborate. But it's not kind of AI, if you like, speaking directly to end customers or funding organizations or whoever it might be. And when it comes to, excuse me, when it comes to kind of helping organizations or helping individuals augment what they do, a lot of the preparation in terms of the insights, feeding the cues, maybe during a telephone call that they're having, that's the kind of back office stuff that's low risk for people, because even if it comes up with a bad idea, you don't need to use it. As opposed to it's not in the face of the candidate or the client at that point in time. The reason I think that we're going to progress beyond that is because I see a whole range of demonstrations and systems coming to market at the moment, some of which are free to use initially, but then you go into a subscription, that have got remarkable abilities, and the demonstrations are quite striking in terms of what they can achieve. So I know that the technology is there. But what I don't know yet is how consistent and reliable it's going to be within the next 6 months. But it will improve over time. You may have seen a video on YouTube where there's a guy and he's running across a kind of a basketball pitch, and his 2 friends are holding out the 2 sides of his trousers. And he runs up to it. He does a double somersault and he lands in his trousers. So, okay, brilliant, hilarious. We know it's possible. What we don't know is, was that his first take, or was that his 60-second take? And I suspect it was his 67-second take, and he's got all sorts of bruises. But I think that's the same with some of the demonstrations we're seeing with AI systems, that it can really understand nuance. It can start to understand the way that we're presenting ourselves. It can come up with some really insightful questions. But the demonstrations we see are always the best of all of the ones that they recorded. But the fact is, we know that that's now possible. And the only challenge is to how can we continuously improve that software? How can we give it more data, make it more easily used and more accessible? And I think that process is going to take months rather than years to make that very, very reliable for all of us to actually use.
Okay, interesting. I mean, if you think it's months, then we probably need to have you back on the podcast again in 12, 18 months and we'll see where we're at.
But
But if
the
it's
thing
5
is,
or 10 years, which is what I think, James, it's quite possible you and I will have retired by then, but we'll have to
yes,
see, who knows. We could then, of course, send our 2 avatars to have an interview with each other.
that's right. Yeah, we could interview each other every month for those 10 years.
I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, because as we've talked offline, I'm an NLP master practitioner.
Hmm.
You know, I'm being trained to read body language. And having done it now for 20 years and having done it with delegates in a training room or people I'm coaching, you know, people choose not to tell you the truth quite a lot of the time. Now, I deliberately expressed that in the way I did, because as I've often said to delegates when I train them how to read body language, just because somebody's choosing not to tell you the truth to a question you've asked, don't immediately think that they're lying, they're sinister, and you can't trust them. Because what you then need to do is try and find out, well, what's the reason? Why might they choose not? And people have got a whole raft of reasons, some of which in a candidate interview or a job interview has probably got nothing to do with their ability to do the job. They might have stuff already going on in their personal life. They may have stuff that has happened to them in their earlier life, which actually impacts the way they behave, the way they think. And you've just asked them a question in a way that kind of touches on that area. So they've chosen to be economic with the truth in the way they've answered it, because they don't want to explain why 4 years they were living in Cambridge as opposed to their hometown of Bradford. Or they don't want to explain a certain element about, you know, why they support a certain football team, because it reveals things about them they don't want to have to explain. So some people are more open than others. Some people are very, very tight-lipped, and other people are very, you know, very open and actually overshare. And so it's, you know, and as a trained interviewer, let alone with NLP, you know, there are questions I know how to ask in 3 different ways, but the first way you're asking the question, you might not necessarily get the answer you want, but you can use the other 2 mechanisms to come at the candidate from a slightly different angle and give them a scenario, for example, and say, you know, if I was to go down the pub with you and your mate tonight, and while you're at the bar buying us both a drink, I says to your best mate, so tell me, what is Jane, Billy, Samantha, Imresh like? Tell me. And it's interesting to see the answers they give to that question, as opposed to, so tell me a bit about yourself.
Well, interestingly, there's a lot of work in chatbots, particularly when it comes to mental health provision.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of clients that wanted a chatbot to particularly focus on kind of mental health conditions, whether it's, you know, work-life balance, you know, stress at work, you know, looking at coping strategies. And what the research consistently finds over the last year or 18 months is that the level of perceived empathy of these chatbots is exceeding general practitioners, for instance, or, you know, business, you know, your line manager, etc.
Yeah.
So the way that the chatbots ask questions, reflect back the answers, move on to the next topic, the way they're kind of, you know, tactful, understanding, they can draw on experience that they've ingested from every case study they've ever read on the internet, is done in a very, very compelling way. But one of the impacts of that is that a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people find that they can be more open with the chatbots because they know it's a machine. They're not going to be judged. They're not going to say something that's kind of embarrassing because that person's going to be thinking, gosh, did they really say that? Yeah, they know it's a computer program. And so there is, you know, I think a sizable section of the population that actually feels more comfortable with some difficult conversations and some difficult questions. So again, as part of an overall package of understanding candidates, trying to make the right fit, predicting performance, understanding risk, you know, will they really stay the course? Are they the right person for the job? I think there is a part that AI can play in this. You know, even despite what you've said about, you know, it's not an NLP master practitioner yet. It may soon be, but it's part of a jigsaw, part of what can be useful to us.
I think it's very interesting. James, we're sort of coming towards the end of our podcast today, which has been truly fascinating. And I think there's loads more questions I want to ask you. So I've already decided we need to get you back on at some point. But before we go, one of the things we touched on was you were talking about the whole concept we've got on our podcast, which is Recruitment Reimagined, and you were describing to me the process you feel business owners should go through. I mean, you got any comments on that?
I think the key thing for me is to start, and not just to start, but to keep moving on and think through what's coming down the track over the next couple of years. There are obviously a whole range of recruitment organisations that are well on with using AI in all sorts of different forms. And there are others which are kind of holding back and very much relying on their personal relationships, which has been key to their business success. Certainly, a lot of the smaller agencies, with tens of thousands, have got particular personal relationships with previous employers, previous clients, and that's the bedrock on which they build their business. And if they are a small business of just one or two people, productivity is often a bit less important because they can stretch their working day, and they haven't always got access to the tools that they need in order to really accelerate some of the processes that they use. So AI, and particularly generative AI, can help them do a lot of that. But if an organization is not moving forwards with this, you can say, yes, they're likely to be left behind, which is fair enough, because people are not only starting to use these tools we're talking about in terms of the big data analysis and analysis of their databases, bringing in the knowledge from the internet, as well as using chatbots in their day-to-day processes, but they're also starting to put in place AI agents, which will do almost complete roles as part of an organization. I was speaking to an entrepreneur yesterday that has just got 3 people in the company, and 48 AI agents.
Wow.
And that's the balance in terms of what they've struck out. And they've got specific roles for each of those agents, and they do particular things for that particular business. But if that's coming on
more about, I'm fascinated. Are they 48 doing the same job, or are they doing elements of the same? What sort of line of business are they in?
Please no, they've all not only got job titles, but they've also got names. And the emails are kind of first name dot last name at company name. So they've got specific, whether it's sales, marketing, finance, whether it's doing research into certain areas, whether it's communicating with customers, responding to emails. These AI agents have been particularly tuned to deliver that kind of response.
I'd love to talk to that person. Any chance you could get him to connect with me? Because I'd love to have him on the show. Because 48, wow, that's a 50-man business or woman business or team business, and he's got 48 agents. That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. Well, we're going for a coffee on Monday, so you're welcome to join us.
What with him or with his agents?
Well, no, that's a good question. It's a person to person, so it should be him.
Oh, that's good. You're not sending an avatar yet, then?
Yeah. So the point is that if that is not only the future of organizations, and we're all going to be working and collaborating with these AI bots that are having particular roles, not just tasks to do. And if that's also going to be the environment with which we're recruiting into, so our customers are going to need real people as well as using a lot of bots, and therefore they're going to need the skills for the people that we recruit for them to be able to collaborate with these bots, understand what it's all about. If that's the kind of direction of travel, and people have already started out on that, then we need to have one very, very keen eye on what that means for us. What's the risk? Are we going to be done out of business by our own clients who can just simply purchase some of these bots and therefore not need the agency? Are we going to be bypassed by the candidates who are going to interface straight with the end clients because they've got the ability to do so? What's going to be our added value in the middle? But organizations that are starting to get left behind, the challenge they've got is if they get left behind, they're probably not the kind of organizations that can actually catch up. So if they realize in a couple of years' time that there's a different business model out there, that it's starting to erode volume of work they've got, the efficiency, their prices are becoming uncompetitive because they're being undercut more often, it's difficult to catch up once you're behind, not just because you've got a long way to go, but because if your mindset is about, no, I'm going to focus on what I've got, then your mindset isn't going to be, okay, I need to now completely have a personality transplant and do something different in the next 6 months. So I would always advertise for people to keep up, get involved, throw themselves into what this means, start in practical ways, make sure that they bring their team together and they do it in a very positive and reinforcing way. But make sure you don't end up with being the organization that's going to find themselves on the tail end in a couple of years' time.
James, that is brilliant advice. I wholly concur with what you've said. Thank you so much for coming on today. I look forward to having you back on in a few weeks or months' time. But for today, everybody, thank you very much, James Crawford, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Fascinating conversation. Thanks very much, Ian.